On islands. I've spent most of my life living on an island. In fact, everyone lives on an island if they're a human being, because some of them are continents, but they're all in the end surrounded by the sea. But the island I live on is a relatively small island off the northwest coast of Europe, namely England, Scotland, Wales. And this island, I realize increasingly, has shaped my life. When people ask me what explains the peculiarity, as I've described it, of the English, or the peculiarity of the Japanese, the first and most obvious factor is that they are islands. So why is islandhood so influential in forming the personality and the culture and the customs and the law and politics of civilizations? Why do island peoples often, but of course not always, because it's different in each island, and Sri Lanka is different from Madagascar and so on, but these two islands in particular, how is it that their islandhood has made them into rather unique and unusual kinds of civilization? Well, if you're surrounded by the sea, a reasonable amount of sea, then one effect is that you are protected from attack. And one of the great sadnesses and curses of continental countries is that you have long land borders and people can attack you at any time, try and grab some of your land. It's more difficult with the sea, and if you have a reasonable navy, then you can protect yourself. And navies, among other things, are much less likely to lead to rebellion. Sailors don't tend to come on land and overthrow the political systems, whereas armies do. And one thing that all continental and other countries have to do is to raise a very large army to protect themselves along their borders. And the raising of that army has huge consequences. Firstly, you have to pay for it somehow, and you either tax your citizens very highly, or you place all your soldiers on top of the citizenry, on top of the peasants, and they maraud and predate around the country. Both those things are very damaging, and on an island you can have a different kind of taxation system and a much lighter and no standing army. Britain didn't ever have a standing army. It had armies overseas, but they were mainly recruited from local people. And so it changes that, and likewise it changes the political system, because if you're on a landed continental country, you can, as the king or the ruler, you can increasingly threaten, blackmail people within your country by saying, if you don't support me, particularly the people on the borders, I'll just let the neighbouring country come in and take your estates and rape and pillage. So you better do what I say. So authoritarian governments and continental structures are much more likely. And if you look at the pattern of European history or Chinese history, you'll find that they have very long periods of very centralized political systems, while Japan and England have a lot of distributed power through a feudal system, because you have to allow your local barons and earls and others a good deal of local power, and it's not such a big threat. It's not a threat to you as well, because they won't necessarily just go and join some other power, because there's a sea between them. Of course, islandhood also may have negative effects. It may make you very insular, and this is an accusation put against particularly the Japanese, that they shut themselves off for centuries, didn't allow any foreigners to live in Japan, killed any Japanese who went abroad and then came back with any new ideas. And so Japan is an extreme example because the sea between it and the mainland is much rougher and much wider. England's sea is just right because it's only 20-25 miles. So people can easily get across, and England has constantly been cross-fertilized by generation after generation of ideas and people and cultures and all sorts of things which have flowed into the country and reshaped it and modified it. So it's, as I've put elsewhere, it's bounded but leaky, as Jerry Martin would put it. So it's just about a perfect balance. And so being on an island, I think, has been one of the glories, as no doubt Shakespeare would have put it, of living here. And it's allowed England as an island to incubate an unusual capitalist, individualistic, modern sort of system, which couldn't have happened if we had just been like any other continental country. And that system was then propagated because another effect of being an island like the English is that you built up your navies and your sea defences. And so when the era of overseas exploration burst forth after Columbus in the 15th century, the island people, or those who are on a semi-island like Portugal, and to a certain extent Spain on a peninsula, were the ones who could first explore, and likewise the Dutch. So these people, these countries had strong navies, and so the British Empire is another side effect to a considerable extent of the island nature of Britain. And so I feel very fortunate to have lived on this green and pleasant land, although we're just heading into a heat wave, which in many ways is unique, peculiar, and for me rather special.